Thank you very much, Jenny. I think I'm wired, so I don't need to focus on this. First of all, thank you very much for coming and for inviting me in the first place. It's been just wonderful to spend a couple days here with Fred's class as well, and at the McCoy's home. So I've been spoiled. I had a wonderful time, and I hope you have a wonderful time tonight. So just let me say something about the title. Things I've Learned is sort of a takeoff, actually, on Sagmeister, my namesake, Stefan Sagmeister. Things I have learned. So I just sort of like took a take on his. Anyway, I also had another title, which is more apt. History, mystery. Anyway, just to kind of start from the very beginning, and I was born in Switzerland in 1942, so don't do the math, in the middle of the Second World War and relatively close to the German border. The government in Switzerland ordered a complete blackout at the time to make sure that the warplanes would not by mistake drop any bombs on Switzerland. And so it was completely dark. The midwife couldn't find the house, and my dad actually delivered me. So he did a good job, no? I think. In kindergarten, while the lady next to me is preparing for motherhood and the one across from me is doing some real abstract plants or double down arrows, I'm building a house. My grandfather was an architect with 3 beautiful daughters. My father was studying architecture and worked with my grandfather, or future grandfather, building a church when he got the calling to be a Methodist minister. And he married the oldest of the daughters, and the rest is history. So my older brother then was a very serious guy, my best friend to this day. He's a terrific guy. He was always the straight-laced officer who told me to crawl through thick and thin, which I did with pleasure. As you can see, I'm sort of more the rebel there on the left. Anyway, so some really, really early ripped paper and cut paper design of mine. I did it in kindergarten or whatever, something very early. No, I was 7 already, so we're jumping ahead. But obviously the typography was given. I just supplied the crows, and the way we ripped paper at the time was like we would take a needle and make a perforation and then rip it. So it was not so much by chance. Anyway, to make a long story short, I applied to the school in Basel, Basel School of Design in '58, and 2 years later came into the professional class. So I was 6 years in Basel doing that. My teachers at the time were Armin Hoffmann, Emil Ruder, Kurt Howard, Donald Brun, and a whole lot of accomplished artists and designers. I learned to see graphic quality in things and interpret what I saw, like here, a bunch of birch trees. We called it at the time translation, to translate something into an abstract form. And obviously, this has to do with music, perhaps more Miles than Rassan Roland Kirk, than Mozart. I played the cello in church and the upright bass in a jazz quintet, so I was very much into music at the time. And in fact, I had to sort of decide whether I wanted to go into graphics or music, and I think I made the right decision. While I was at school, I modeled for a men's store, and at the same time designed the ad. I mean, I'm a designer and modeler. Check out the type; it's pretty damn good, no? This must have been 1959 or something like that. Anyway, so what can I say? It was the 60s, even in Switzerland. So my first job out of school was at J.R. Geissbuhler, speaking of chess. So this was my first employment and project at Geissbuhler in Geissbuhler Pharmaceuticals, which is a big pharmaceutical company, which then became Ciba-Geigy, which is today's Novartis. It's a gigantic pharmaceutical company with their headquarters in Basel. It was almost for me a direct continuation of what I had done at the school, to translate something and to make something visible which was perhaps not normally visible. And doing a whole program out of it was part of it, to make sure that there was a cohesive graphic language. You can see on the left there's a packaging, and the legs walk around the package itself. But learning to show in an aesthetic way what cannot be shown photographically was sort of the most important thing I've learned. To show a baby in a womb, a heart, the whole blood vessels and the whole system was an aesthetic way to kind of show what is otherwise, rather bloody affair. These were airbrushed drops. This is all so much pre-computer. I can't even tell you how much earlier that was. Really early. But, I learned so much at GEIGI in a way of actually applying what I've learned at school, like to communicate something. Like here, this was making a visual connection between a typical sports injury, like shoulders for hockey players, or fractures and bruising of elbows while ice skating. So to sort of combine two icons and get the message across of what that does to somebody, and of course the product which heals it. But also to do something quite abstract at times with typography and cut holes. In this case, it was to make a new point for a product. Most of these promotional and educational materials were sent worldwide to doctors, nurses, clinics, pharmacists, and hospitals. And we quickly found out that actually this was a very sophisticated clientele. You could assume that doctors played the violin on the side, and it is a sophisticated crowd. So you could go a little bit further than normal. And so we used a lot of die cuts and all kinds of things, or a typical sample package which was sent out to try a new product for a doctor or what have you, with samples inside. And then this was what they called the promotion department of GEIGI, and we published a brochure. I did the cover for it, and this is very low tech. This might look very high tech to you, but all it was wrong reading type as a photostat in a cone shape on the bottom, a Christmas ball which reflected it right reading, and then photographed down the cone. So, it was very low tech, but it really worked. Of course, I got married and we had our first son, Philip, one of my proudest milestones, to have sons. As you will see, I had quite a few more. But anyway, he is a physicist today. So the year was 1967. After 3 years at GEIGI, I was asked by Ken Hebert to come to Philadelphia and help him teach at PCA, Philadelphia College of Art, as it was called. Then it's now University of the Arts. They made it a university as soon as I left. No, that's not true. It was only meant for a couple of years, and until the new graphic design department was established, but I got stuck and stayed there for more than 7 years. I ended up teaching at PCA and also do graphics, of course. And with me, we're teaching, Ken Hebert on the right, Ave Pildes in the middle, Keith Goddard next to me, and me with this crazy tie. We taught together. There were more teachers later on, April Greiman, Dan Friedman, and so on. But anyway, I did a little logo for the music festival in Philadelphia quite soon before while I was teaching, of course. And at the same time, I was working on the side for Murphy Levy Werman, and this is Richard Saul Werman, the guy who invented TED, who was at the time running an architecture studio, and I helped him to sort of establish a graphic design capabilities. And this was a series of books called The Process of Choice, and it dealt with the environment and with making decision making. And what I sort of started to learn is that books can be all kinds of connecting pieces. So I literally made the covers of the books you see on the bottom. There are 4 pieces of making, getting the resources together, making decisions, have obstacles, and then make the final decision. So each book had a front cover and a back cover, and the back cover would connect to the next book's front cover, and so on. So it was like a plumbing system, At the time, I was really into, you will find out, I'm at the heart of me, I'm an illustrator, foremost, because I've always dealt with actual metaphors and images and so on. But at that time, I was very much into spray can and cutting friskets and things like that. So the illustrations were mostly very sort of free-floating metaphors and associations. So Armin Hoffman would come and visit every year while teaching for a couple of weeks at Yale. Here from left to right, the late Dan Friedman, who was turning his back to us, Armin Hoffman, Keith Goddard, and me, and then Hans Allemann, who was actually stepping in for me when I stopped teaching in Philly and then became chairman of that department. After 7 years, I moved to New York and worked for 1 year with the design firm Ansbach Gross in Portugal. Here, a logo and a series of decorative posters for a financial service company, or firm, I should say. If it looks like an exercise from my school days, you're right, it's not completely wrong. It looked very much like what we were doing with Armin Hoffman at the time, even though this was quite a bit later. So I get a call from Ivan Chermayev and Tom Geissbuhler, and they asked me whether I wanted to work with them. We knew each other a little bit, and they had heard that I was across the street actually with Ansbach Gross in Portugal, and so they asked me to come. And 1975, this all took place, and they invited me to join, and I didn't know whether I would fit into this very established marriage of Ivan and Tom. They were really a close partnership. And but I brought to this an illustrative approach like Ivan Chermayev, who does a lot of collages and free kind of painterly kind of things. And at the same time, Tom Geissbuhler, who is the master of logos like Mobile, Xerox, Chase, PBS, that's Tom Geissbuhler. But as you can see, even with my complicated name, I could squeeze in. One of my early things was a poster for the 30th anniversary of Alvin Ailey, and it was probably the fastest poster or fastest project I ever sold. It took exactly 10 minutes. He immediately loved it. He understood the complete thing, that his name was not just him as a choreographer, but also that he was the dance company, and his name stood for all these dancers. So I worked a lot with the brush and things of that sort. In the meantime, Alvin Ailey's whole identity system has been replaced with very boring type. If you ever see it, you know what it turned into. This is a poster for a program, an identity program. It's a poster for a mobile-sponsored sports event in Germany. All of this is cut paper, by the way, if you're wondering what the media was. I always was very involved with drawing. This was a little thing for Simpson Paper Company, and they had a theme like sequences, and of course I went for what came first, chicken or the egg. So I also at the same time tried to sort of show a metaphor between drawing, photography, and actual feathers, taped on. Speaking of birds, a bird of a different feather, Crane & Company became a client for 20 plus years including a new identity program, packaging, promotional materials. If you don't know who Crane is, Crane manufactures the currency you're carrying in your wallet and the currency for other countries as well, by the way. But they also manufacture 100%, or used to manufacture 100% cotton paper. So the majority of their paper is used for stationary purposes. And so this was the logo for it. Then we also did a couple of interesting educational kind of things, because at the time, you know, we aimed it at graphic designers, whatever we did, because the graphic designers were the ones who specified what kind of paper to use for corporate programs and what have you. So everything had a little bit of a twist to it, like the covers became an envelope, and the envelope was actually a booklet, and so on. We even did, in order to promote the paper, we aimed, you know, we aimed at the designers again who dealt with global kind of design by showing conversion tables. And so the edges of the pages were all conversions from, you know, from pounds to kilograms, and you know, from centimeters to our system, the inch system, and all that. I still don't know how it's called, actually. You know, it's not the metric system. It's what? Imperial. Huh? Imperial. Oh, okay, good. I buy that. But anyway, I mean, it was more of a tool so that people could quickly convert things and also find out what was the international formats for stationery, especially. You might know that already, but of course, you know, business cards were all kinds of sizes. In every country was different. I mean, in Germany, the business cards were like postcard size almost, and other things were very small. But of course, with the invention of the credit card, and therefore the wallets, you know, everything became that size. Everything became the business card size, which we all know, which fits into your wallet. At the same time, we tried to really show what 100% cotton was all about, and even used 100% cotton on the cover here, actual fabric. And inside, these are lino cuts by Stephen Alcorn. We showed how that what cotton was all about, and how it's used, and how superior a material it is to regular paper. And you know, Crane had some crazy ideas every once in a while. At one point, they asked the government to return the shredded currency so that they could make paper out of it again, and they called it old money. And it was a very crazy thing. Actually, it was terrible paper. I mean, you put it on a press, and it soaked up all the ink you possibly put in the fountain. It was like blotting paper, you know. But anyway, we had fun promoting it and made wallets out of paper. And, you know, of course, the dollar bills were 80-pound paper and 24-pound paper and so on. And then I'm showing you a lot of Crane because I had him as a client for over 20 years. You know, we also tried to show that the watermark in stationery paper is sort of a mark of quality, and associated it with, you know, Steinway pianos, Rolls Royces, Godiva chocolate, and so on. So it was all the same sort of high quality products. I also made some inroads with trying to explain to the design community that engraving was actually a very old and wonderful technique of printing, and try to explain to the engravers that, and to the designers, I was mainly making the point that it isn't just used for wedding invitations. You know, that it's not necessarily so. It can be done in very modern form. And the engravers, I was trying to convince that not all graphic designers were crazy. You know, so I showed modern ways of engraving to bring these two groups together, and we had a conference, and it was all interesting because there was a lot of sort of acknowledging on both sides, first hatred and whatever, you know, saying you guys, you know, you're just steeped in history, you're just doing wedding invitations. Can't you do something like Steff just showed us? And, you know, and the graphic designer said, oh, this may be a fun technique to use every once in a while. We had the opportunity to redesign the visual identity for NBC in '79. My solution won, but didn't get on the air until 1985. So it took that long because NBC was not in first place in the ratings. In fact, it was in the third place at the time in '79. And so the head of NBC was saying, you know, I think we should do this. You're absolutely right, but we have to wait until we're #1 because there has to be momentum behind it, because it's very expensive to convert all the NBC stations and all the markings and all the signage and what have you to a new identity. And so we waited and waited, and then Grant Tinker came on as the husband of Mary Tyler Moore, came on as head of NBC, and he again said, you know, we definitely got to do this. This is right, and we should launch it. And but we're still not quite #1. You know, they were sort of hovering in #2. So all the time until 1984, all of a sudden I get a phone call, and they said, you know, can you please show this to the board tomorrow morning? You know, and I went into the slide, you know, this like 35 millimeter slides, and dust them off, you know, blow at the. And assemble them again and try to remember what the hell we wanted to say. But, well, it all worked out. But then, of course, they wanted it immediately. Like, you know, this was like in July. And they said, you know, can we have it in September? And I tried very hard to convince the whole board that that would be a mistake, because there were so many old NBCs out there, you know, the N, blue and red, I don't know whether you remember. You know, there was an early device which sort of looked like a peacock, which was a device for running a program from black and white into color. It would say the next program is brought to you in living colors, and would go, you probably remember. Some of your older guys remember that. So anyway, it worked very well. And so in '85, we actually, you know, during '84, we presented, we produced a manual, we produced signage all over the place, and it took a full year to really implement the whole story. And so in '85, September '85, it was actually on the air finally. So some things take time. Good things take time, I guess, is what the saying is. But we did a lot of animations, and in the identity manual, I tried to show with the divider pages all the different techniques, from silk screen to die cut to, you know, gloss varnish and textures and what have you. I was a little insane at the time, because this is all cut paper, a poster, you know, which that we called the people who assisted us at the time mechanical people, you know, which actually, you know, some of your older people will remember that execution, you know, they were actually making the boards and present, you know, make it ready for printing. And when I showed them the pencil sketch for this whole thing, they said, you must be out of your mind, we can't do that, you know, with ruby lith and all this kind of stuff. So I took it home and cut it into paper. The New Victory Theater for kids on Times Square, it was actually the first Broadway theater for kids. It was sort of an antidote to 42nd Street, which used to be really sleaze alley at best. And it is it's right around the corner from Times Square, so they requested as much light as you could possibly put on. So we said, okay, we put New Victory on the top of the roof. And I said, yeah, fine. And then we have banners on the side, fine. And we have a logo in the middle, well lit, fine. We have lights on the stairs, fine. Not enough, not enough. So then I ran a neon channel around the whole facade, because I really didn't want to mess up the antique thing. And then it was finally enough. So, I mean, it's still to this day, when you do anything on Times Square, you got to, you know, you got to outdo everybody else around you, and that's already flashing and going and, you know, all kinds of crazy animated stuff. Anyway, and a little banner. Then I was asked to, had the opportunity to produce a series of 8 posters for the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs. They were displayed at all New York airports, bus and train stations, ship terminals for several years. And this is one. Just the idea was that each one would say New York is dance, and then it would list all the dance companies, not alphabetically, but just, you know, there's Paul Taylor, there's Alvin Ailey, of course, there's all kinds of other dance companies, so that the visitor would sort of get an idea that it's not just one thing when you come to New York. You know, when you want to see dance, there is a ton of possibilities. If you don't think of New York City as gardens and zoos, but we have quite a few zoos and gardens and parks and all that. So again, cut and rip paper was my media at the time to sort of make this, but it really had to have mass appeal. The whole thing was sponsored by Philip Morris, of all things. They were trying to be a good citizen and gave them money for it all. But they left me alone. I mean, they didn't really say much. So these are just 2 of those posters. So I have to say this right up front. This was my wife's idea. You know, there was a call for doing a poster. You had to sort of design the poster and then also get it printed for free and contribute it to the Museum of Modern Art of Hiroshima. This was all to commemorate 40 years since the bomb on Hiroshima. So it was really a call for peace and all that. And I was talking to my wife and I was saying, you know, I don't want to do skulls and bones and mushroom clouds and all that kind of stuff. I want to do something very positive. And she traveled to the Orient all the time. She was in man's fashion. So she says, yeah, why don't you have Godzilla and King Kong hold hands? And we giggled and, you know, whatever. Had a glass of wine and I forgot all about it. And in the morning I wake up and I said, oh, this is right. This is perfect, you know. And I went to town and it became probably the most popular poster I ever did because I got about 200 individual, you know, mails and phone calls and what have you. Everybody wanted a poster, and I gave them all away. I shipped them, so I have just a few left. But you can't have them. That's it. Anyway, speaking of my wife, there she is, and my love and toughest critic, and life partner and best friend and everything else. And she's obviously trying to cover up my midsection there a little bit. During the AIDS crisis, you know, we all did posters to sort of make a statement about AIDS and how to stop the epidemic. And not just that, you know, I found the stop sign, all of a sudden saw it was a 4-letter word as well. But on the bottom of the stop signs, at least in New York, it says Department of Traffic. And I thought I should leave that in. That's just perfect, you know, that's exactly what it's about. It's all about traffic. Okay, Time Warner, 1990. Time Warner was really a merger between Time Inc., Time Magazine, Time Life, you might remember, and Warner Communications, which had a very beautiful symbol by Saul Bass, which was all about film and video and that. And when they merged, we submitted various ideas, but this one won out, my design, because I felt that I was trying to figure a way that both companies had a common denominator. And what I found is that both their products, the journalistic ones as well as the film, were about seeing and listening, or you know, eye and ear, so to speak. So the common denominator was really, you know, that, and hence the combination of eye and ear, which, you know, everybody around me said, you can't do another eye. CBS has the eye already. You can't do another one, you know. But it actually seemed to work. And then at the same time, we said, you know, why don't we make it one word, Time Warner? And the client said, you know, you can't do that. You know, we all will remember that it is Time and Warner. And we said, you know, it will take less than a year, and people will just say Time Warner, and there's no question about it. So it actually happened that way, and people got very quickly used to the idea. In the meantime, as you might have noticed, it has been redrawn by Brand Union, another design company, without my knowledge. It's now much thinner. It doesn't have the yin-yang in the middle. And altogether, it's not as good as this. You can still see the original, by the way, in manhole covers in New York City when you walk around. There's still my logo there. I traveled to China a few times. This was a logo competition in 2000 as a judge, and they also produced a book on me in China. I can't read it. I have no idea what it says. I just recognize the images. So this was a poster for the World Day of Children, and the title I gave it was "Children Are the Rhythm of the World." Again, cut paper and punched out holes. Gave a talk in Georgia, and by dealing with G for Georgia and Geissbuhler and Steff, and sort of came up with this SG initial kind of thing. Anyway, this is Toledo, USA, not Toledo, Spain. They have a museum of art, and of course it was like all the other museums. It was called TMA, which was alphabet soup and made us crazy. So what I really wanted to do was to spell the whole name out, but also in a way that it would become an icon. And as museums go, most of the museums have framed things, right, and see-through. So that the frame was really became a way of sort of saying museum at the same time and letting it be a transparent thing. And quite immediately we showed them how to use it, and how it could be a see-through thing, and that it could change color, and it could just be really playful, which is my aim with almost all the identities I've ever designed, is that they're not static, that they can be interpreted in different ways. And in fact, the in-house department at first was slavishly following what we had shown in the presentations, but then after a while they became a little bit more experimental and showed things in different ways for their newsletter and their annual reports and things like that. And to me, that is like the most endearing kind of thing, or I'm most proud of that if an identity really lasts beyond what we shown them. Of course, we always show applications and sort of whet their appetite for applying it, but it takes a while to sink in. And then, some interesting things happened, like that all of a sudden Toledo Museum would be emphasized and of art would be going back depending on how you used it with the frame and so on. And at the same time, I did the design for the whole signage system. It's a very big campus, and the Toledo Symphony is there as well on this campus, and now a glass museum, a beautiful glass museum designed by Sana, the famous architect. But some of it was glass inset, and some of it was just part of the steel structure so that you could see through. And, it was always sort of an interesting thing to see through. The New York Public Library had its 100th anniversary in New York, and it actually, the New York Public Library has 82 branch libraries around the whole New York area. And so it's a very, and then of course the main library with the lions and all that kind of stuff. And on, 42nd and Madison, I think. Yeah. Anyway, I've been already away for 8 months from New York. But I mean, the whole point of this logo, and it's probably the most convoluted logo I've ever done. I mean, in fact, for me, to design a logo is sort of therapeutic because I'm an illustrator, so more is always better. And so my whole idea of less is more comes to fruition when I have to design a logo, because it has to be concentrated, it has to be simple, it has to be communicative, it has to be, you know, instantly recognizable. And so, but here I really wanted to change the perception of library. A library is not just books, and especially nowadays, you only go to the library to see the actual thing. You know, everything else you can get on the internet, right? So, or you go there just to read and have peace. You know, that's another thing. But the whole studying and reading up on things is less and less important with the library. But I was trying to say, you know, there are, you know, there are broadsheets, there's rare documents, there's sheet music, there's Braille, there's internet connected and digitized matter. So just for people to read library, then not think of books alone, you know, that immediately you have some other connotations. And then we applied it, of course, to all kinds of things. And also coined the tagline, the New York Public Library is celebrating its 2nd century, which immediately sort of turned around the vision. Rather than to say we're 100 years old, or we have a centennial or anything of the sort, we were saying, you know, try to look forward. The next 100 years is what counts, right? And, you know, I would have tremendous arguments with some of them, because all 82 branch libraries had representatives, and they were all assembled, and I had to defend this thing. And you know, typical what happens in a case like that, it just takes one guy or one woman who has an objection about something. And immediately somebody piped up and said, you know, how can you run it up the side? You know, all spines in the US of A run from the top down. All book spines run that way. You know, how could you do that? And I would say, you know, but I wanted to, so that people in New York, you know, so that they look up, so that they start on the bottom, and, you know, it should be an uplifting experience and all that kind of jazz. And besides, all book spines in Europe run the other way. They run from the bottom up, like this. Anyway, but I won the argument finally. But it took, you know what it means to argue with a librarian about language. And anyway, so, but I won out finally. We then abbreviated it also for some of the branches where we couldn't hang the long flag. We made buttons, and so on. The Signature Theater was a small theater company on the bottom of 42nd Street with the idea of one playwright, one season. So every season they would just show Edward Albee all season long, or they would show, you know, Guare or somebody like that, or Wilson or somebody. So we collected the signatures, literally, of all the playwrights and made this cloud of it, and then used it, of course, on the window. You could see into the box office and all that, or look out on the street. We used it on the box office. We sort of started to call it affectionately the hairball, you know. I know my cats would have loved it, you know. But it became sort of a much more decorative kind of thing, you know, for certain events and all that. So on goes the story. 2005 was a very important year for me. I founded C&G Partners after 30 years being with Jermive and Geissbuhler, with Jonathan Alger, the tall guy there, and Keith Helmetag, and in front of the two of them, Emanuele Frigerio, very talented designers all, and me. And we got, in the same year, we got no, I'm sorry. So it was too many things going on in that year, because we also received the AIGA medal. I received the AIGA medal, I should say. And in 2007, which was soon after that, we won the National Design Award and were invited to the White House. So the lady on the left, you might remember, is Laura Bush. So we had a little selfie there. This was an interesting story and an interesting project. The National Parks of New York Harbor. You don't think of national parks in New York Harbor, but there are 23 national parks related immediately through the harbor itself. And I was asked to create an identity program for that. And so I designed this parent logo just to get a little bit of a flavor of, that there were buildings. There was the torch of the Statue of Liberty, which is a national park. There were things happening in the parks and on the beaches, and there were fortresses and all that kind of stuff. So, but the idea was that all 23 parks-related parks would retain their name. That was sort of important to me, that they would not give up their name and then have a logo which sort of had to was trying to say, we all belong together. So instead of that, literally every one of the 23 had the same typeface, had the little waves on the bottom, and then there were little hints as to what it was. Ellis Island with the boat, and Statue of Liberty with the torch, Governor's Island with the fortress, and so on. So Gateway was all the beaches, and the most complicated one, the Lower East Side Tenement Museum. And so all 23 were done like that. But what it did is it gave everybody their unique name, and therefore, not an entirely new identity, but they all belong to one family of parks. And I did all kinds of things, posters, and I thought it could become a beach towel, but it never did. So, over time, and, these are a couple of international logos I designed. I designed a lot of logos, as you probably know. But, some of the media things, and you might not recognize the top right. That's Multicanal, which is sort of the Time Warner of Argentina. Merck, you might know, pharmaceutical company. And Telemundo, Voice of America, NPR. NPR, many of these were redesigned in the meantime, so I'm dating myself a little bit. But that was the original NPR identity, where you could push it together, make one, or make it vertical, or run, have 1, 2, 3 around the corner. It would have been a very flexible thing, but some web design company, 5 years after it was implemented, convinced them that that would not work on the web. And so they changed it. It's now again 3 little squares and had lowercase n and p and r, very boring kind of stuff in it. But let me tell you a little bit about this torch thing. Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, is a broadcasting network sponsored by the US Congress, broadcasting within and from 28 countries, none of which speak English, by the way. So, the way the logo happened was sort of interesting, because we showed them torches, we showed them birds, we showed them flames, we showed all kinds of things. And in the presentation, this was the only time this happened to me, in the presentation I realized, what it should be. And it was not what I was showing. So I excused myself, went to the photocopy machine, made photocopies and taped it together, and came back into the meeting. There's only 3 people in the meeting, so it wasn't such a big to-do, and showed them this. And I said, I just have the feeling this is what works. It's a flame, it's a bird, it's a torch, it's 5 pieces, because you're broadcasting in 5 continents, and they loved it, and things went on from there. But as you can see, it had to work in all these languages, and some read from left to right and some from right to left, so it had to do all kinds of acrobatics. We launched it around the new year, so I had this idea of doing something very international, but this is maybe interesting for some of the students. It's using the vernacular flags. It's not using the actual flags, because that would have been politically a problem. You know, who wants to be right? Who wants to be left? Who wants to be on the bottom? Who wants to be on top? You know, it would have been a real problem. And you know, some of the symbols, like Argentina has a sun, and some other people have sickles and hammers, and you know, all kinds of stuff. So it's more the vernacular of flags, but you get the idea that it is an international kind of thing. So this is a test. Did anybody find anything funny going on with the world? Play it again. All right. All right. Thank you. Perfect. Somebody, I mean, most of the time students don't see that, but anyway, it was sort of an interesting situation because I had the layout and the whole storyboard figured out, and I said, you know, I want this to turn, and then I wanted to flatten out and map the world, and gave it to the animator, and the animator said, you know, something is not working. I mean, you know, when I do this, then the world is backwards, you know, and it only would work if I would turn it and sort of inside out. And I said, inside out, this is exactly what RFE is doing. They're broadcasting from the inside out, right? So we said, nobody will notice. In fact, and if they do, it's a positive thing, you know, that we're broadcasting from the inside out. Anyway, in addition to that, this was, by the way, the opening for Bosnian TV, for RFE, for Radio Free Europe. Actually, it's called Radio Free Liberty. Radio Liberty, I'm sorry. And in that part of the country. So they had a new building in Prague, which is the headquarters where I did all my research and stuff. And they put out a sort of a competition to sculptors. They said, we need something near the street because it's all built back and it's very difficult to get to. You cannot get in. You get frisked from top to bottom because there are all these nations in there broadcasting and all the different broadcasting networks. We need something on the outside. And so most sculptors sort of submitted things with people around the world holding hands, lots of fountains and things like that. And they said, that's not us, you know, that's not Radio Liberty at all. You know, we need something simpler. And so they came to me and they said, why can't you do something, try to figure out a simple way to do the sculpture, maybe it's the logo, maybe not. So anyway, so I suggested that because it's a main road which going in and out of of the inner city of Prague, to do something typographic. And by the way, it's not current. So, you know, to spell out liberty. And in my research, I asked, of course, what is the word liberty in Czech? And they said svoboda, which has exactly the same amount of letters. So when you go the other way, you know, in and out of the city, you read svoboda, which is liberty in Czech. Something interesting happened because I had everything made out of steel. I mean, that was the intent. You know, I had models built. We had little animation things. So as you would drive by, what would you see, and this and that and the other. And so they came back to us and they said, you know, this is great, but the Czechs are really good with glass. They're unbelievable good with glass. Can we make the orange part in glass? I said, well, if you have no problem, like, really joining steel with glass and all that, they did such an incredible good job, So it's really nice to see that somebody, comes from the material point of view. So, each of the leather combinations are sort of interesting. I've also done a lot of nonprofit organizations, museums and galleries and the Royal Shakespeare Company and the Birmingham Museum of Art and so on. So, and the advertising agency with the name of Kaplan Thaler came to us and we're looking for a new identity. And that is very rare, that an advertising agency comes to a designer to ask for an identity, but usually they do it themselves because they think they're capable of it, But a few gotten wise to the fact that, they do their thing, we do our thing. So, Linda Kaplan and Robin Koval wrote a bunch of books, but the first book they did was Bang, and it was really all about making a bang for the client. And a very good book, actually. In the meantime, they wrote other books like the Power of Small and The Power of Nice and things like that. Really good books, small books, good reads. But anyway, so they showed us this when we were pitching for the job, and we immediately said, like, I remember saying to them, when you bust a light bulb, the light goes out. So the whole idea of the idea light bulb doesn't make sense anymore. And it looks like an old-fashioned light bulb anyway. So we don't think that's quite the right message. And in addition, they said, we really like yellow. We really want something with yellow. And I said, so all your promotion material is red. What's the story? And they said, yeah, but we really like yellow. So anyway, so we went back and made a pitch, and the pitch was that. They call me mellow yellow, quite rightly. They call me mellow yellow. So we got the job. It was really sort of, you have to know what they are. Kaplan Thaler, that's Swift. They do the quacking duck, what is it, Aflac. And, they do Trojan condoms and, all kinds of witty ways of communicating stuff. So they were very receptive to this kind of approach. And anyway, so we redesigned the logo, keeping the idea of the light bulb because those books are out and they're strong, but simply doing a typographic thing and letting the A be sort of the source of the light, and then really did a yellow number on everything, so their disc and their promotional things all became yellow. And because we said, if you want to be yellow, you have to own it. You have to own it as much as Kodak did and as much as National Geographic does. But in each case, it is related to an icon. Very recently, I did this big identity branding project, which with Klein Davis Mann advertising agency to design a new logo for Mallinckrodt Pharmaceutical, a very, very terrible German-sounding name, but it's a very old firm, and they were always around, but they were always under other kind of umbrella names, and so they really wanted to come out as a brand new global company, merging whatever they had before, so hence the hexagons sort of merging together and being transparent about the whole thing. you know, we live in the times where you can do a logo with 20 colors, right? I mean, because it doesn't cost anymore. It's not, it's, you know, it's a 4-color process if you print it normal, CMYK, or if you RGB, of course, and you know, it doesn't really matter anymore that something is very, very colorful. But the slogan they had, by the way, was where others see complex problems, we see unique solutions. So the M sort of comes through there, and I thought that the slogan was actually really well thought out. Right away in the branding manual, we showed them how this logo could be taken apart. You know, it all exists out of triangles. The triangles can be used as pointers and bullets and other kinds of things. They can be cubes and borders and things like that. Because to me, a branding, if it's at all possible, should be flexible, should be fun, should grow. It shouldn't be like stamped on the back of a cow as it originally was, you know, that it's always found in the same corner and what have you. So the website, when they introduced it, looked like this, and we did an interesting identity graphic design guidelines for the whole thing, and started to use it. And you can see, you know, the little hexagon points become the dots. The little triangles already are in the navigation, and so the individual component came around. As I was doing this, and I sort of built a little model out of it, and I thought, you know, one of these days, maybe they want something for the entrance, something really interesting as a sculpture kind of thing, and made this little cardboard model. And the guys from the advertising agency loved it and took it with them to the client and showed it to them, and I would check, and I would say, you know, did you show them, and what did they say? Yeah, they loved it, yeah. What happened with it and all that? Months and months went by, they built it, you know, without my supervision or anything of the sort. It's all made out of glass, and it's lit at night, and it looks fabulous, really great. I had nothing to do with it other than that little idea of merging together. Then years ago, I was asked by AIGA to do a one-off poster for all their competitions and what is it called? Yeah, for the competitions. Good enough. But anyway, the thought was that, you know, all these things we call design, you know, communications design, sign system design, motion graphic design, you know, everything ends up in design, and it sort of weaves this very colorful carpet. I also obviously discovered the filter in Illustrator. So I've been making holiday cards all my life, and I always try something new. I have a friend of mine who is an engraver and printer, and I have this old friendship, and every year I design, somebody contributes the paper, and he gets it printed, and everybody gets cards, and nobody pays any money. So I've been doing that for 20 years easy. And so each time it's something different. I mean, in this case, it had to do with all the different stars, the Star of Allah and the Christian star and the American star and Bethlehem and all that kind of stuff in the word peace. Another time it was dial your own wish, you know, so it would be interesting kind of combinations where not just happy holidays, but, you know, happy Christmas and things like that. And then it made a snowflake on the backside. I couldn't resist this in 2010 to bring back the old Roman numerals. This was another one, you know, it's simply die cut and folded and kind of stuff. 2013 was, you know, love, joy, prosperity, hope, all that kind of stuff mixed together. And this year I thought I should do something very simple, like the word unity, which can be read from both sides. And it's all about unity this year, I felt, for 2016. That was sort of a wish of mine. Okay, so This is my family. And okay, from left is Luke. Luke is a cinematographer. He did Helvetica and what was it called? Urbanism and Objectified, those three films with Gary Hustwit was the director. Next to him is, he also did Borat, by the way. He was the one with the camera there. You know, you remember that scene where the big ass in the hotel room and so, I think he will never be the same after that. And Kara, next to him, a school teacher in Brooklyn, and the both of them live in Brooklyn. Then comes Ben, who is my youngest. He is has a degree in sculpture and is now in Seattle working for a custom furniture company. Then comes my lovely wife, and then after her, Josephine Vitetta, who just got married to my other son, Alex. I have 4 sons, as you can figure out by now. They just got married last summer, and a very beautiful lady. And then comes, on the right side, is Nicole Stamos, who is a nurse, and my oldest son, Philip, who is a physicist with a chip coding company in Boston. So that is my story. Thank you very much for giving me a chance to look in the rearview mirror a little bit. So do you have any questions? What? Oh, yeah. Like the 200 other people, right? You know, the curse of it is that when you're on that list, if I don't send you one, you know, immediately I hear about it, right? So it's like every year it's a little bit more. It's got to stop. Yeah. In fact, I left that Fred this year, didn't I? Yeah. Jeez. Probably didn't have the right address or whatever. And the McCoys, I think I left that too, didn't I? I was never. You were never on my list? Oh my God. There you go. Okay. Duly noted. Anyway. Any question? Oh, don't tell me I left you speechless.
Okay, we go on over here. So oftentimes in design we come to creative roadblocks. I was wondering if you could describe a logo or a project that you've worked on where you got to that creative roadblock and the types of things you do to kind of overcome that block.
That if I understand you right, whether I have a block every once in a while?
Well, creative roadblock where like you're thinking of a design and it's not quite working out and you're struggling to make that design happen.
Every time. I mean, you know, I don't just shake them out of my sleeve. I mean, no, I mean, it's always a struggle. Ask my wife. I go crazy, you know, when I can't find an answer. And, but I mean, the thing is, I'm sort of hard on myself because I'm trying to make sense, you know. I'm not just trying to do a logo which is decorative or, you know, it's just a plain leather form or something like that. I'm always trying to tell a little bit the story of what's behind. And that's, it's difficult. My very immediate job I just finished is a company called Logo Design, Logo Brands. And they make stuff which you bring to the games, you know, coolers and chairs to sit on and all that kind of stuff. And so they used to be called Logo Chairs because they started with chairs in a garage, you know. And it became very big. And so they wanted to call it Logo Brands. So can you imagine doing a logo for Logo Brands? Anyway, I solved it somehow. I mean, a simple discovery I made when you stack logo, then all of a sudden go becomes like a really wonderful word, you know. Go be a fan, go do this, go do that, and it's a different way of looking at logo. It's sort of the same idea with library, you know. You just do something with it so that it is not the normal way you would read logo. And so that seemed to work out. Yeah, what else?
So myself and a lot of my cohorts here were born into a world of computers. And I was just wondering, you showed a lot of your work from the past in paper crafts and doing things by hand, you know, paper cutouts. And you still seem to do a lot of that with the Christmas cards examples and stuff. I was just wondering, was it difficult for you at all to make the transition into the computer technology? Did you fight it at first, or did you really embrace it?
Oh, totally.
And,
you know, I sort of embraced it right away. But it took me a long time to actually, you know, learn it and be able to do it. But I think that was one of the things where my partners and even colleagues, you know, had companies around them, and there was always somebody who could do it. And it's not that I wanted to do it myself all the time, but I wanted to be good enough so that I understood what could be done, right? So I do most of it in Illustrator, and including the holiday cards, you know, and I just try to work with the computer as much as possible. I still sketch on napkins, and like everybody else, you know. I mean, my best friend, Michael Beirut, you know, he says, I couldn't do what you do. He just didn't do it. You know, he didn't touch this whole thing. He had always an army around him who were young people and really knew the stuff. And so he executes his brilliant ideas that way, you know. It doesn't diminish anything about his design capabilities, but, you know, it works that way.
So I'm wondering, can you remember what was the last design that you ever did paper cutouts for?
The most recent, or last? Well, Mercy Core, that's not ripped paper, but it's a brush stroke, was fairly recent, and it's a humanitarian organization, and there was an interesting story in a way, because I knew that this would not be a curated identity, you know, because it had to go out in the field, it had to go on tents, it had to go on lampposts, it had to be, you know, whatever. So I did it in such a way that actually people could imitate it. You know, they didn't have a file to do, you know, out there during the tsunami and what have you. So it was already designed so that somebody else could also do it by hand. It didn't always come out right, you know. I have a whole funny kind of presentation of all the abuses, you know, and funny stuff happened with it. But, you know, it was at least made in such it was handcrafted, because the execution would be handcrafted as well. So rip paper, I still rip paper, yeah. It's fun. I mean, what's so great about cutting paper and rip paper is it's not so perfect. You know, there's a chance of it going wrong, or you know, it can't be contemplated exactly how it's going to rip. So, you know, that's sort of nice that there's a chance of something original, you know, happens while you do that. Same with cutting paper, you know, you cut it and you put it down, and then you cut the next, and it doesn't quite fit, you know, and that's sort of nice. Keeps it fresh. So I teach in Savannah right now because I just moved to Hilton Head Island last summer, and so I'm in South Carolina, and you know, the teaching is the school is really putting so much emphasis on final stuff. Their portfolios are very, very professional looking, and in fact they have 100% employment after 6 months of graduation, all of SCAD, and it's good and right, and they make money right away, and they get employed and all that, but original is difficult to come by, you know. I mean, I want to make them sketch first, and I really want them to fail, you know, and not being so slick already. So that takes a while to take hold, that idea of making. I really like them to make something rather than select. We had this discussion just recently, of how, that's my frustration, is with the computer, it's a matter of selection, is what it is, right? I mean, in fact, they don't even know how to mix CMYK anymore. What is 25% magenta with 100% yellow? I know it's a nice ochre, or it goes into an orange, but they don't. They pick it from the palette. There's this wonderful palette with the gradations and all. They just put their pointer somewhere, and then that's the color. To really adjust it fine and really be able to know 1% makes a difference, they don't experience that. Same with typefaces. They go right on the computer. Whatever is on the system is good enough. They just go through all of these and say, oh, I like this the best. It could be hideous, but, and most of the time is, I mean, so I'm trying to tell them, I mean, there's like 5 typefaces, which, make sense, are sort of the core of it. And of course, you have deviations. I start every type project with Helvetica. I just start there. It doesn't mean I end up there. I love Interstate. I love it. It's a great typeface. Like with the Mallinckrodt thing, Interstate has exactly the angles of the ascenders and descenders, which confirm with the hexagon. So, it works perfect for that. So it's not all Helvetica at all times, but it's a good start. I mean, it's can't actually kill it, just good. I'm sorry, I'm speaking in one direction here. Anything else? I'm sorry, I'm rambling on here.
Sorry. So kind of with that advice to students, do you have advice, closer, do you have specific advice that would help students grow as designers? Like, you've mentioned to sketch out things first, but like, do you have really pointed advice to sort of get them to think beyond?
Yeah, add water and you will grow. No, but it's like, I think the best advice I can give you is if you are passionate about what you do, it will happen, You don't let go. You just keep trying. And I think that's pretty much it. I mean, there's no recipe, And more and more design has to do with thinking. It's not just making, as I was saying. It has to do with concept, real concepts, ideas. And so you can't, you can't just take them out of a drawer. They have to be sort of developed and sketched out. And doodling is like one of the best things because there's something going on between your brain, your hand, and your eye seeing what it just did, There's something going on in that process which is just, you can't do that on the computer. It looks perfect on the computer all the time, It's all beautiful hard edge, it's precise and all that kind of stuff. So it becomes almost a hindrance rather. It stops creativity in a way because it looks too quickly perfect, and that it's a danger. But what are you going to do? I mean, they're here, the computers, we live with them. And I certainly use it all the time. I mean, I hardly do anything without it. And ripped paper is a problem. I mean, Pantone doesn't make the papers anymore, so you can't cut them, So it's gotten more difficult.
Hello, good evening. Sorry.
Oh, hi.
Hey, I was wondering how you define success for yourself, and if it's something that you think you already found or you're in constant pursuit of.
Oh, I've just been around for a long time. I mean, what can I say, Yeah, I mean, I celebrated, what was it like? I just passed my 50th year in as a professional, If you stick long enough around, somebody will notice, if you keep doing stuff. I don't know. I mean, it's not something you find, and you know, I always, I mean, my thing is that it's sort of nice to look back and to realize that perhaps what I did at Geigy was the best work I've ever done. You know, my first stuff. You know, that's sort of a revelation. You know, all of a sudden you'd say everything else you did was sort of downhill from there. So, you know, I don't know. It's you just keep trying to grow. And when people ask me, you know, what is your favorite project? It's the one I'm working on right now. You know, that's it. I mean, you know, because I want to do something really good. You know, it never comes out as good as I really wanted to make it, but you know, you keep trying. Something unusual. I'm waiting for some, you know, the muse to kiss me.
So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the difference between your Swiss design education and what you see as American design education.
Did you notice any Swiss stuff? I don't know. Yeah? Influence. Yeah, sure. I mean, I was asked before, you know, whether I still, I think you were asking me, you know, whether I still carry this with me. It's like a backpack. I mean, I packed it with Armin Hoffman, and I still go with it, you know. It's still there, and it's a process and a way of thinking and discovering and looking at things. That's really all it is, and sort of it's all about discovery and make connections, unusual connections. And, you know, it's all up here kind of thing. And then if you have that to execute with, or the computer for that matter, to execute it the way you want it, then it works, you know. So is that an answer? I don't know.
Well, I was kind of wondering about the cultural difference.
Oh, the cultural difference, yeah. I don't know. I still like chocolate, you know. I'm chocoholic, in fact. Yeah, I mean, the difference, I think it's less so now. I mean, I have a lot of designers in Switzerland, friends of mine, who do unbelievable stuff. I mean, really innovative and fun stuff. It has nothing to do with the old Swiss school. It's just, you know, they've gone beyond. I mean, you know, Werner Jecker and people like that are just geniuses. So but then there are geniuses here, you know. I mean, I really admire my friend Michael Beirut a great deal, because he has a really good head on his shoulder, and he's funny, and he's witty, and you know, goes for it, and he's charming. I mean, you know, his clientele will rave about him. Zagmeister, you know, he's like on a whole other level. He's not even about design anymore, you know. He could start a religion and people would follow. I mean, you know, with his nice Austrian accent, he paces on the stage, and, you know, people just go into dreamland. But, you know, I admire the guy. I mean, he really has very strong ideas. And you know, he sort of discovered that it's about happiness. Well, that's terrific. You know, I feel that way too. It is really about individual happiness. You know, if I would have to be a plumber or something else, I would, you know, commit suicide or something. I don't know. You know, I'd rather do this than anything else. Let's put it this way. But my passion is still at the level it always was. Sometimes I doubt it. Sometimes I say, fuck it. You know, excuse me. You know. Yeah, it's not always fun, and it's hard. I mean, it's still hard. It's still, you know, you can't, the answers don't come so readily. And it gets more hard because there are too many good people around, like you guys, doing good stuff, you know. The competition is stiff. No question about it.
Have you spent any time in architecture or product, or have you, I'm sure you're fascinated with everything, but have you spent any time pursuing any of the other dimensions of design?
I'm teaching right now an environmental graphic design class at SCAD, which has to do with materials and three-dimensional and space and all that kind of stuff. Because it's but I mean, I love architecture. I mean, what you have in Denver here, right there in the middle with Michael Graves and Liebeskind and stuff. I mean, just beautiful, beautiful stuff. Just amazing. So I don't know what the question was.